The Life, Teaching, and Legacy of Martin Luther. Chapter 7. The Leipzig Disputation and the Papal Bull. For various political reasons, after Martin Luther's interview with Cardinal Cajetan, Pope Leo X sought a more conciliatory relationship with Luther. Leo X sent an emissary, Karl von Miltitz, to Frederick the Wise. Von Miltitz was a cousin of Frederick. Miltitz spoke with Luther and secured Luther's promise that he would no longer engage in debate and publication regarding indulgences if those within the Catholic Church who had been opposing Luther would likewise refrain from attacking his position. This truce was short-lived, however, due to the actions of John Eck. Eck, a professor at the University of Ingolstadt, had already engaged in public debate with Luther through a publication entitled Obelisks, which was intended to refute the 95 Theses. Eck had persuaded Duke George the Bearded of Saxony to sponsor a debate between himself and Andreas Karlstadt, a Wittenberg professor who had become convinced of Luther's teachings, at the University of Leipzig. Luther desired to defend his own teachings, and so he arranged to debate Eck at Leipzig as well. In July 1519, Eck and Karlstadt debated for a week concerning the radical sinfulness of humanity. After that debate, Luther debated Eck on the question of whether the papacy was of divine or human institution. According to the terms of the debate, neither Luther nor Eck could bring books to the table, but they were dependent upon what they had memorized. The proof quoted by Eck consisted of canon law and selections from church history. Though Luther had studied vigorously for the debate, he was no match for Eck in regards to these types of documents. Luther instinctively turned to the writings that he had memorized for years as a monk and as a professor of theology. In response to Eck, Luther quoted the Bible. Luther's quoting the Bible to refute canon law brought the charge from Eck that Luther was a Hussite, a follower of the teachings of Jan Hus, since Jan Hus had similarly argued against the papacy on the basis of Scripture. Luther objected to the charge, saying that Hus should have kept to the unity of the Church, but as the debate went on, it became apparent that Luther had only a vague knowledge concerning what Hus had actually taught. At the lunch break, Luther retreated to the library to study documents from the Council of Constance, the assembly at which Hus had been condemned. As Luther studied Huss's words from the Council of Constance, he was surprised at what he found. Luther was especially surprised to find that Huss, even in taking actions that further fragmented the institutional Catholic Church, actually quoted Augustine in affirming that there is only one church, spiritually speaking. This one church was made of all those whom God had chosen for salvation. When the debate continued, Luther affirmed, "Among the articles of John Huss, I find many which are plainly Christian and evangelical, which the universal church cannot condemn." This statement greatly troubled Duke George, who viewed the Hussites as political enemies of the Saxons. Luther used the Leipzig disputation to refine his doctrine of sola scriptura. Sola scriptura is the understanding of Scripture alone as the final and sufficient authority concerning matters of life and godliness for the individual believer and the church as a whole. During the debate, Luther asserted, "A council has sometimes erred and may sometimes err. Nor has a council authority to establish new articles of faith. A council cannot make divine right out of that which by nature is not divine right. Councils have contradicted each other, for the recent Lateran Council has reversed the claim of the councils of Constance and Basel that a council is above a pope. A simple layman, armed with Scripture, is to be believed above a pope or a council without it. As for the pope's decretal on indulgences, I say that neither the church nor the pope can establish articles of faith. These must come from Scripture. For the sake of Scripture, we should reject pope and councils." In 1520, Martin Luther published 5 of his primary works: the Sermon on Good Works in May, the Papacy at Rome in June, the Address to the German Nobility in August, the Babylonian Captivity in September, and the Freedom of the Christian Man in November. Luther's teachings in these works were directly informed by the insight he gained concerning sola scriptura during the Leipzig disputation. Pope Leo X, meanwhile, despaired of conciliation with Luther based on the reports he heard from the Leipzig disputation. He was further troubled by Luther's affirmation of Huss, whom the Pope considered a heretic, so he issued a papal bull titled Exsurge Domine. In this document, the Pope proclaimed that if Luther did not recant, he would be excommunicated. Whenever a copy of the papal bull reached a new town, those in the town who were faithful to the Pope would hurl all of the publications by Luther that they could find into a bonfire. Receiving reports concerning the contents of the bull, Luther eventually published 2 tracts in response: Against the Execrable Bull of the Antichrist, and Assertion of all the articles wrongly condemned in the Roman bull. At 10 a.m. on December 10, 1520, the faculty and students of the University of Wittenberg, joined by many citizens from the town who agreed with Luther, met at a large bonfire. Here they tossed volumes of papal constitutions, canon law, and works of scholastic theology into the fire. Luther himself flung a copy of the papal bull on the flames.